By the late 14th century, the Korean peninsula was a state in crisis. The ruling Goryeo dynasty, which had held power for 400 years, was crumbling under the weight of political infighting, the collapse of their Mongol overlords, and relentless raids by coastal pirates. In 1388, the Goryeo court ordered a popular general named Yi Sangye to march north and invade the newly established Ming dynasty in China. But when Yi reached Wiwa Island, he made a calculated choice. He turned his army around, marched back to the capital, and seized control of the government. Looking at this map of the conquered territory, you can see the scale of the state Yi absorbed. Within a few years, he officially deposed the last Goryeo monarch and assumed total control over the peninsula. At the time, the Goryeo court was split between those still loyal to the dying Mongol Empire and those favoring the rising Ming. By refusing the order to march, Yi Seongge effectively ended centuries of Goryeo's forced subservience to Mongol influence, clearing the path for a sovereign state. In 1392, that new nation was officially named the Kingdom of Great Joseon. To finalize the break from the past, Yi, now King Taizhou, relocated the capital to a strategically central location along the Han River, Hanyang, the city we know today as Seoul. Notice on this map how the newly divided provinces radiate outward from this central hub. The new capital served as the physical center, but the state required an ideological transformation to function. Because the previous dynasty was deeply intertwined with Buddhism, the new Joseon rulers aggressively purged Buddhist influence from the government and installed Neo-Confucianism as the sole guiding philosophy. This meant the state would now be run as a highly structured bureaucracy. Political power and government positions would no longer be handed out entirely by birthright. They had to be earned by passing punishingly difficult academic civil service examinations. A military coup is inherently violent and illegal. By framing his rebellion as a necessary step to restore scholarly order to a corrupt land, King Keijo used Neo-Confucianism to claim the mandate of heaven, divine approval for his new dynasty. By the 15th century, Joseon's institutional focus on scholarship began to produce measurable technological breakthroughs. King Sejong the Great, the dynasty's fourth monarch, redirected this academic energy toward the immediate physical needs of his people. Sejong re-established a royal research institute known as the Hall of Worthies, gathering the brightest minds in the kingdom. He tasked them with solving the practical problems facing Joseon's agrarian economy. Looking at this timeline comparison, you can see the results. In 1441, Sejong scientists invented the chukagu, a standardized rain gauge designed to measure precipitation across the provinces. Similar instruments did not appear in Europe for another 2 centuries. This push into astronomy, meteorology, and engineering was not driven by idle academic curiosity. It was a calculated state effort to manage crop yields, predict droughts, and ensure the physical survival of the peasant class that fed the nation. Despite these advancements, Joseon had a severe literacy problem. The kingdom relied entirely on complex Chinese characters, known as Hanja, for official writing. Because mastering thousands of characters required years of expensive education, reading and writing were exclusive to the elite, leaving commoners legally blind and easily exploited. In 1443, Sejong enacted a radical solution. This ancient manuscript contrasts complex Chinese Hanja on the right with a new phonetic script on the left, Hangul. Its consonants physically mimic the shape your mouth and throat make when pronouncing them, allowing commoners to learn it in days. By replacing an exclusionary language with an accessible one, Sejong executed the highest ideal of Neo-Confucian governance. He used his absolute authority to distribute knowledge downwards, giving his people the tools to advocate for themselves. Over the following centuries, the intellectual engine that drove Joseon's golden age began to stall. The Neo-Confucian scholars running the government fractured into bitter, warring political factions, spending their energy debating minor points of ideological purity rather than managing the economy. The military still produced moments of tactical brilliance, most notably in the late 16th century, when Admiral Yi Sun-shin deployed heavily armored turtle ships to devastate a massive Japanese invasion fleet. But following these exhausting wars, the ruling class retreated inward, adopting a stance of deep, isolationist conservatism. By the 19th century, that isolation had severe domestic consequences. Famines and exorbitant taxation crushed the agrarian working class. The paralyzed government soon found itself facing massive, violent civilian uprisings, like the Donghak Peasant Revolution, requiring armed military crackdowns to maintain order. The state had become trapped by its own success. The strict scholarly operating system that built Joseon's stability had hardened into dogma, paralyzing the country right when a rapidly modernizing world demanded flexibility. That modernizing world arrived at their shores by force. In 1876, a newly industrialized and heavily armed Japanese empire dispatched gunboats to the peninsula, coercing Joseon into signing the Ganghwa Treaty and tearing open the country's borders to foreign extraction. Japanese interference quickly escalated into brutal, direct action against the royal court. When Empress Myeongsung attempted to counter Japanese influence by courting diplomatic support from Russia and China, Japanese agents infiltrated the palace and assassinated her. The Joseon court made a desperate final attempt to assert its independence by rebranding itself as the Korean Empire, but the geopolitical reality was already sealed. In August 1910, the 500-year-old Joseon dynasty was formally and forcefully annexed into the Empire of Japan. The sovereign state of Joseon was erased from the map, but the internal framework it built over 5 centuries survived the devastation of the 20th century. Joseon's cultural architecture, an identity rooted in language and history, proved to be its most enduring asset. It was a cultural foundation so deep and ingrained in the people that no occupying force could ever fully dismantle or erase it.